December 28, 1963, San Diego, California. A 17-year-old boy named Randy Gardner looked at a blank science fair entry form and decided he wanted to win. Not just participate, win. And the idea that came to him that night, scrawled in pencil on a yellow notepad while the rest of his neighborhood slept, would eventually land him in the pages of medical journals, on the desk of Stanford University's most celebrated sleep researcher, and permanently inside the nightmares of every neuroscientist who has studied what happens when a human being refuses to let the lights go out inside his own mind. This is not a story about bravado. This is a story about what lives inside the darkness behind your eyelids, and what escapes when you refuse to let it in. Randy's plan was simple, the way only a teenager's plan can be. He would stay awake, longer than anyone ever had. 11 days, 264 hours. No drugs, no stimulants, just willpower, basketball, and two of his closest friends rotating shifts to make sure he didn't drift off in a chair. His science fair hypothesis was clean. What does sleep deprivation do to human cognitive function? What he could not have known was that the experiment would stop being a science fair project by the end of the first week and become something the medical community would study for the next 6 decades. Listen carefully, because this is where the story takes its first turn. Word of Randy's attempt reached Dr. William Dement at Stanford University, a man who was, at that very moment, building the science of sleep medicine almost from scratch. Dement drove down to San Diego and did something remarkable for 1964. He didn't shut the experiment down. He joined it. He brought monitoring equipment. He brought rigor. He turned a teenage bet into a documented, methodologically observed case study that would become one of the most cited pieces of evidence in the entire history of sleep science. This was, by every definition, a monitored scientific observation, not a stunt to be replicated, and the distinction matters enormously, as you will understand before this story is over. By day 2, Randy was still functioning. Irritable, yes. Slower to laugh, but functional. His friends kept him moving. Pinball machines, basketball in the driveway, conversation to keep the air in the room from going still. Sleep researchers will tell you that the first 48 hours are deceptive. The body compensates. Adrenaline, social stimulation, novelty. They act as scaffolding, holding the structure upright even as the foundation begins to crack. Now ask yourself something. When was the last time you felt genuinely rested? Not just unconscious, rested. Because the reason that question matters is this. Every single hour that Randy Gardner stayed awake, his brain was accumulating a debt that the science of the 1960s was only beginning to understand. Here is what we know now that they didn't know then. Inside your brain while you sleep, a system activates that has no name in common language, but that scientists call the glymphatic system. Think of it as the brain's overnight janitorial crew. While you are unconscious, the cells of your brain actually shrink slightly, creating channels through which cerebrospinal fluid flows and physically flushes out toxic waste proteins, the metabolic byproducts of a day's worth of thinking, feeling, and existing. One of those proteins is called beta-amyloid. You may have heard that name before. It is the same protein found in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. The glymphatic flush, the brain's housekeeping, removes it every single night. When you skip sleep, the crew doesn't show up. The waste accumulates. And by day 4, for Randy Gardner, the accumulation began to show. Day 4 was when things got strange. This is where the documented record becomes genuinely disturbing and where the science fair project became a medical observation. Randy began to lose sensation, not dramatically, not in the way it happens in films, subtly, insidiously. He reported that food began to lose its taste. His sense of smell dulled. The world, he said, felt like it was being experienced through a thin layer of cotton, present but muffled. And then, on day 4, standing in his own kitchen, Randy Gardner saw something that was not there. A visual hallucination. A garden path, appearing in the fog at the edge of his perception. He wasn't frightened. He reported it to Dement almost casually, the way you'd mention a strange cloud formation. That casualness, researchers later noted, was itself a symptom. The capacity for appropriate alarm was already degrading. By day 6, Randy was experiencing what sleep scientists call microsleeps. And this is the concept that a 15-year-old should understand, because it explains something terrifying about the limits of willpower. A microsleep is exactly what it sounds like. Your brain, without your permission, without warning, without any outward sign that you or anyone watching you can detect, simply turns off. For between 1 and 30 seconds, the cortex, the thinking, perceiving, conscious part of your brain, goes dark. The lights go out. You are, clinically, asleep. And then you are awake again, with no memory of the gap, no awareness that it happened, no ability to prevent the next one. Think about that. Your brain can go to sleep while your eyes are open. Randy Gardner's friends and Dr. Dement had to watch him constantly. Not because he would fall over, but because he would have microsleeps, standing up, mid-sentence, and then continue the sentence as if nothing had interrupted it. His brain was, in the most literal sense possible, rebooting in segments, finding stolen seconds of the housekeeping it so desperately needed. The fog of the mind had stopped being a metaphor and become a clinical description. By day 9, his speech had slowed. He had difficulty with abstract thoughts and early memory tasks. Dr. Dement documented that when asked to count backward from 100 by sevens, Randy would stop mid-sequence and forget entirely what he had been doing. Not where he was in the count, but the task itself, as if it had simply never been assigned. He was, in many measurable respects, no longer operating as a fully cognitively intact individual. And here is the ethical truth that must be spoken plainly, because the story is a window, not an invitation. What Randy Gardner was doing has been classified by the Guinness World Records organization as too dangerous to officially recognize. The category no longer exists in their records. They stopped accepting attempts because the documented risks, psychosis, organ stress, irreversible neurological disruption, are not theoretical, they are measured, they are real. They are real. This was a monitored experiment in a specific historical moment. It was never meant to be a template. It should never be attempted by anyone. On January 8, 1964, at 6:04 in the morning, after 11 days and 24 minutes without sleep, 264 hours, the longest scientifically documented period of voluntary sleep deprivation in history, Randy Gardner went to bed. He slept for 14 hours and 40 minutes. And here is where the story becomes, in its own quiet way, extraordinary. When Randy woke up, he was, by almost every measure, fine. His cognitive function recovered. His sensory perception returned. The hallucinations did not return. The medical community, half expecting to document irreversible damage, found instead a resilient human brain that had survived something it was never designed to survive and had, after one long and profound sleep, largely restored itself. The glymphatic flush had run. The janitorial crew had come in and worked overtime. The fog had cleared, but largely is not completely, and recovered is not unchanged. Randy Gardner in later life reported significant ongoing insomnia, a cruel irony, the man who once refused to sleep unable, decades later, to do it easily. His case remains the most studied instance of extreme sleep deprivation in human history. Dr. William Dement carried the data from those 11 days into a career that helped build Stanford Sleep Research Center and changed how medicine understands rest as not a passive state, but an active, essential, irreplaceable biological process, as necessary as breathing, as non-negotiable as a heartbeat. What Randy Gardner did, a teenager with a pencil and a science fair form did, was give the world a mirror. And in that mirror, we saw something that still keeps sleep researchers awake at night. The beautiful, fragile, fiercely complex machinery of the resting human mind, working in the dark, cleaning the house, paying the debts of the day, keeping us, all of us, alive. Go to sleep tonight. The crew is waiting.